On Friday, we told a story about a small baby in a small, faraway place. And today, we're telling a big story that somehow happens in every time and in every place. It's the same story. It's hard to talk about the arrival of Christ into the world. Mark's gospel avoids the whole thing altogether. Luke and Matthew each piece together what we know of the human perspectives of shepherds and magi and intertwine them with Mary's and Joseph's stories. And our guy John today, well, John takes an entirely different tack. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the wisdom of God. In the beginning was the Logos. In the beginning was the creativity of God. Precisely because it's hard to imagine God being God in the world, Luke and Matthew bring that divine story down to a very human scale. And precisely because it's really hard to imagine God being God in the world, John blows the story up and beyond the reaches of our beliefs and our imaginations. Instead of letting all these different stories and accounts distract us or feel like contradictions, today they wash over me like a gift. I am glad and grateful that the stories of the arrival of God come to us in small and large sizes. A few weeks ago, in our Advent Unbound conversations, a few of us reflected on our experiences of joy, which were, as it turns out, often based on the smallest things, like the taste of a peach on a summer afternoon, or other minor moments, rather than the grand events of our lives. Our moments of joy can be quite common experiences, things that anyone and everyone might have access to, not rarefied or all that exclusive. And so also, amid the beauty and pomp and swirl of our services on Friday, we were really just gathering again and again, trying to get a peek into a little corner of a stall where we heard there was a baby wrapped up. How common is that? People cooing around a cute little baby? It's what we do. Celebrating new life and all that it portends. Sometimes joy is tiny. Just a few pounds of not much. Just another baby being born, like the millions and billions of other babies, but each one precious, especially when it's yours, or maybe even more so when it's your grandbaby. I hear that's a good gig. Sometimes joy is just a few moments together after a long time apart, or just a look. It's simple, little, even kind of ordinary. That's one of the ways that God shows up in the world. But then today we gather and we get a grander story, a more resplendent and dramatic rehearsal of what it's also like when God shows up. All things came into being through him. The life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory. Because sometimes it's not simple at all, or ordinary. Because sometimes it's actually hard to get your arms around joy. Sometimes it's not so small. The only thing I've got to go on is that maybe it's like the largest creature on earth, maybe one of those big old blue whales, improbably breaking the surface. Mark Doty describes another whale, a humpback, in his poem Visitation, as exuberant and playful, breaching, thrilling the onlookers. A blue whale, I've been told, is a gorgeous beast at almost 100 feet long and weighing up to, they say, nearly 400,000 pounds. Something that could take up a good bit of this nave, y'all. Lifting itself up out of one world and into another. That's no small affair. And even talking about the largest creature on earth still doesn't even begin to touch the immensity of God and of the scope of joy that God's arrival into our world signifies. So we need words like glory and power and light and an unwieldy idea like the Word made flesh. It's hard to talk about how God becomes God in the world. Precisely because it's hard to imagine God being God in the world, we need lots of stories. Baby-sized stories, all the way up through whales, and to keep going. No doubt, to the reaches of our language and of our imagination. And we don't need to worry about the contradictions in our stories. We don't need to measure them out and decide that we can only keep certain ideas that line up and match and fit the scale, whatever the scale is. No, we need all the stories, all the encounters, from shepherds and incredulous husbands-to-be, and poets and neighbors and angels and astronomers and whale watchers, and maybe you. And whether your story is a great big one or a small one, your story of the arrival of God into your life is significant, and it's worth telling. Because Christ's arrival happens. And it happens in minute and almost missable ways, and in immense and immeasurable ways, and everything in between. Because joy comes in all shapes and sizes. Mark Doty ends that poem with this question: what did you think? That joy was some slight thing? Whether it's small or large, joy is not slight. Whether it's barely a handful of baby in her arms in the stable, or the incomprehensibility of a beast that's got a heart so big that we could walk around inside just the heart, or the word and wisdom of God infusing every shimmering corner of this world, even peaches. The arrival of Christ into the world is not a slight thing. So tell the story. The same story, with all its differences, precisely because it's hard to imagine God being God in the world. We need to keep doing that very thing.